find addictions, we find major depressions, we find OCD, and we now know that psychiatrically those disorders have been reclassified as biologically based disorders. They run in families, they're overrepresented in first-degree relatives, and in all of these men, both the famous men and the men that I have in my practice, they have a first-degree relative who suffers from bipolar, OCD, major depression, or an addiction. And the suicide risk in the history of these families is very high. In fact, 2 of the patients I have, their fathers actually did suicide, and they were suicide risk themselves. So there is something now, whether this is what accrues to being a beta male or what this is, but it is very much part of the psychosocial, physical picture of this type of person. Sex and the Icarus man. Many needs, many women, or so little time, so many women. They are surrounded by and propped up by the women in their lives. Now, in my practice, these men are married, and about half of the time their flame out has been regarding an affair or sexual harassment of somebody. The other half is like fiscal malfeasance, insider trading, whatever. But the women that they deal with, even though they may be waitresses at Waffle Houses, or they may be call girls from Craigslist, they are important to these men. And that's a very hard thing for the wives to understand. They are real relationships. They're not just one-night stand throwaways. It's as if these men are so enormously mother-needy that it is not sufficient to have one woman totally theirs and taking care of them. They seek one or many other women to prop them up, to sort of bolster this fragile self-esteem. The more successful and high-powered they are, the more women they require. How society deals with their disastrous descent. Okay. All of the men that I have in my practice are facing serious federal charges. Now you might say, well, you know, how do you get arrested for having an affair? Well, because you sent harassing emails from the family computer to a woman. And once you send something over the internet, that becomes a federal crime. Or, I mean, when this guy set out to do it, he had no idea he was breaking federal laws. He had no idea he was going to be looking at 7 years in a federal jail. But that's what happens. Our legal system goes very, very hard on these kinds of things. Now, the famous men we looked at, they lost their careers, their legacies, their reputations. Tiger Woods lost his edge. He's not playing golf the way he did before. But none of them were arrested. All right, Clinton was impeached. That's a sad thing that's going to tarnish his reputation throughout history. But none of them, because of who they were, did things that were actionable and were arrested. When our neighbors do something like this, they're arrested. And when they are arrested, the book is thrown at them. Because there is an element of envy and jealousy, the rest of us look at the lives they have and think they have it all. We can't imagine the emptiness, the hollowness, the pressure, the loneliness of the lives that these men have. We envy them. And when they get indicted, they get the books thrown at them. And juries have no sympathy. I mean, I had a case, the man with the harassing emails. He was a $5 million a year partner, and his bonuses went anywhere from $2 to $5 million a year. Now, you've got a federal judge who's making 180 grand a year. He's not going to have much sympathy with this guy. It's like, you have a life like that, and you have to screw around with hookers, basically. You have to harass them on the email. So there's very little understanding that there might be something else that's motivating these men. There's very little thought that they might be more pitied than scorned. Icarus men in the media. Oh, the media has a field day. I mean, how many of you were sick about hearing Tiger Woods? Every day there was another thing. It was grinding away and grinding away. Even with the men in the private men that I see that live here on Long Island, every one of them has had really, really nasty press, including pictures of their wives, pictures of their children, all over the internet. I could give you their names because they're matters of public record, but I prefer not to because they have been so damaged. The only consolation for one family that lived in Great Neck is the mother was so embarrassed that the children should go to school after the New York Post had this, and you know what the New York Post headlines are like. So they brought the children in for a therapy session to prepare them for going to school the next day. And I basically said to them, don't worry, what class are you in? Who's your homeroom teacher? Don't worry, I have 5 people that are in the same position right in your class. It really is epidemic. It's also due to the social skewed ideas of masculinity. It's like what it means to be a successful man, boiled into one thing, money and power. And when you have money and power, then you're supposed to have a lot of sex too. Their main defense mechanisms, compartmentalization, splitting, and dissociation. Okay, I don't want that to sound like psychobabble. Those are very simple concepts. Compartmentalization is they live in 2 worlds. As one of my patients said, my affair with my Russian woman down in Bay Ridge that I paid for was on another world, was in an alternate universe. It had nothing to do with my wife and my 2 children. My mistress never called my wife, and we had a contract. Obviously, this man was a lawyer. We had a contract, and the contract was, I will give you $3,500 a month. I will pay for your Berlitz lessons so you speak English. I will pay for your son's tutoring and all of that. You never call my wife, and I will never leave my wife. Splitting. Splitting is a very primitive defense. It means there are no gray areas in how we perceive the world. Everything is black and white, like a child. The example is always given, if mommy lets me have the ice cream, she's good mommy. If mommy says no, she's mommy devil sent from hell. It's very primitive, and that is exactly what these men do. They believe that they must be all perfect and all good and do everything right and have no faults and no flaws. Now, no one can live with that kind of pressure. In fact, I venture to say that most of us are loved not despite our faults, but because of our faults. That's what makes us who we are. Well, they become like cardboard men. They can't have it. They can't make a mistake at work. They can't even use the wrong salad fork when they go out. And so they have this other life where they are sort of in the slums of things. They're either with women that are not women they would introduce to their families, or they're doing financial deals that are really beneath them. It's like, because they have to live in this solid white, they make the negative dark side in their life. Dissociation is another interesting one. I'm sure you've all heard of multiple personality disorder. Well, a lot of these people really dissociate. They split. They turn into another person, like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing. In some cases, they actually even give themselves a different name. And of course, when the prosecutors get a hold of this, they make it seem like, well, they're trying to get away with this, they're trying to cover their tracks, but they aren't. They're sending emails, they're sending text messages, and they're using this other name. And it's like, this person is the person who's allowed to have id. Remember your Freudian stuff, ego, superego, and id? Okay, id is the guy who gets to have all the fun. Okay, id does all the bad stuff, all the pleasurable stuff. Id has sex, it drinks, it has money, it buys fancy clothes, and superego is really dull. Well, these men are superego 24/7 in their lives. Elliot Spitzer. I mean, that guy was so buttoned down. And then they become Mr. Id. And there's no integration, there's no balance. This is a fractured and fragmented personality. You know, if we think of how all of us operate, there are areas in our life that are similar. You know, people can say, oh, you would do this or you wouldn't do that. Well, these men are just that way. They're split. They have enigmatic mothers. These are mothers who abdicate their responsibility to emotionally nurture and surrender their sons to oppressive fathers. Okay? Now, you don't have to be a Freudian to see that maybe that's why they run around and have to have all these women. You think of Tiger Woods' mother. She should have been named Tiger. She was very, very complicit with allowing a baby, a toddler, to be out in the backyard at 2 years old for hours and hours. His father made this machine that would like just fling balls or set balls up in some way that he had to hit. All of you who have children and grandchildren of 2 years old, can you imagine the oppressiveness to be able to make a 2-year-old do that? And so what did she get out of it? She got to be the wife of the mother of Tiger Woods. President Clinton's mother. She had serial marriages. She married men who were brutal. She had men who abused her son. I'm sure you remember the story of him actually getting a gun and having to fire a shot at the last stepfather who was becoming assaultive to his mother. You know, mother's supposed to take care of that. She's not supposed to leave that up to her 14-year-old son. Let's take a look at the wives. The good wife. Okay? Little time for intimacy with the husband, and she takes complete charge of running the household, leaving hubby to roam. She ignores the obvious signs. One of the wives in my practice said, I should have snooped. I snooped all the time. I didn't snoop. I don't know why I didn't snoop. Can anybody guess why she didn't snoop? She didn't want to know. She didn't want to know. Because if she knew, she'd have to do something. And if she did something, the whole fabulous, idyllic life that she was complicit in building up would come crashing down. Little did she know it was going to come crashing down when 6 FBI agents showed up on her doorstep and said, by the way, your husband has been harassing prostitutes. I call them she-wolves and Mother Teresas. The Icarus complex, and this is why I call it a complex, it's not a diagnosis for one person. It's a bio-psychosocial constellation of problem issues. It's biological, because as we said, there's probably a genetic underpinning. It's psychological, and it's social, because of the concepts of masculinity, and also because of the way their marriage is constituted. The Icarus man could never come to power if he did not have an Icarus wife. She truly is the power behind the throne. She is an alpha woman. She's smart, she's well educated, she's socially connected and or gorgeous. She often comes from a family with money. If you take a look at this collection of Icarus wives, you see Silta Spitzer, Magnolia Debutante, comes from a lot of money, lovely looking woman, all the right stuff. Christine Farrar, supermodel, wife of John DeLorean. Jenny Sanford, you see her there at her beautifully homely decorated home. Elizabeth Edwards, before she became ill, was really a very lovely woman. I was charitable to Hillary. I think that's the best picture of her I ever saw. The wonders of Photoshop. And then, of course, Tiger Woods' wife, Ellen Nordrigan. I mean, what can I say? They are the power behind the throne. The Icarus wife begins to assume more and more responsibility in the marriage while viewing her husband as a